fighter has the highest fight IQ?
I don't think there's nobody in the game that has the fight IQ that I have.
Off the charts.
His fucking IQ
The
is
highest
insane.
fight IQ maybe ever.
This guy hits hard. He's tough. He's this, he's that. And this guy has a dream. But my fight IQ will win this fight.
Welcome to the Fight IQ podcast. We're back with another top lists episode. Today, we're bringing you our top 3 best one-sided beatdowns of all time. Being that there's no fights this weekend, we thought it'd be a good idea to compile these lists so you guys can have some good fights to watch this weekend in lieu of an actual card. The only criteria that we placed on these choices were that it had to go at least past the halfway point of the fight. With that being said, Andrew, you want to kick us off with your number 3?
Yeah, so my number 3 pick, I went a little old school. I went back to UFC 153, and it's going to be Glover Teixeira versus Fabio Maldonado. Not a fight that I was super familiar with ahead of this. I kind of came across it, started watching it, and realized that this was probably one of the biggest mismatches that I've personally seen. Fight starts out about 10 seconds in. Glover almost gets a knockout, wobbles him, gets him against the cage. As he's recovering, gets a takedown, immediately goes to mount. And you get about 4.5 minutes of ground and pound. It's mostly elbows. Both of his eyes by the end of the first round are already starting to swell. Mario Yamasaki's the ref, so you know it's a recipe for disaster. First round ends, last 10 seconds or so. This is the wildest thing. Fabio gets up, throws a quick left hook, and almost knocks out Glover. Second round starts, basically the same story. Gets in there, immediately takes him down. You're dealing with ground and pound. I think Glover had 3 submission attempts in that round, including an arm triangle where he had stepped all the way off to the side and was laying next to him. It looked to me like Fabio tapped. Obviously, Mario didn't see it that way, so it gave him enough time, escaped, went back to full mount. The round ends with ground and pound and doctor stoppage at the end of the fight. Even after the doctor came in, checked on him, said, "Nah, you're good, bro. No need to stop the fight. Get back in there." And then calls it at the end of the second round while he's on the stool. Just
who was the doctor? Mario Yamasaki's brother?
Shoot, honestly, it might have been, bro. They were in it together.
They both did a little hard.
Yeah, dude. Right at the end, looking at each other. One of them speaks Portuguese, so nobody really knows what's going on. I mean, Joe Rogan's even in, like, he's on the commentary booth and he's talking about. He's like, "I don't know what's going on. I can't understand what the ref's talking about." And then all of a sudden, he's good to go again. You're like, "Shit, okay." Dude, so that has got to be my start here, going old school vintage.
Heck yeah. My number 3 most one-sided beatdown of all time. It's crucial for MMA lore because this was the last Mario Yamasaki reffing performance. It's going to be Valentina Shevchenko versus Priscilla Cachoeira. It doesn't. How many times have you seen a ref get fired for being so bad at their job and not stopping a fight? Immediately, like, Dana White went to the press conference and was like, "This guy's never going to ref again. Like, this is terrible." Priscilla Cachoeira got put in mounted crucifix and just got the shit elbowed out of her face. It was terrible. She really had nothing for her anywhere. Nothing for her in the grappling. And then on the feet, it was very easy for Valentina to take her down. Until she ultimately got the rear naked choke at the end of round 2. Just looking at the strike stats, 95-2. You know what I'm saying? Significant strikes. Total strikes, 230-3.
Yikes. Hey, man, two of the 3 were significant, though.
Yeah, 2 of the 3 were significant. So she has a good percentage. But at the same time, it was very one-sided. There was nothing really Priscilla had for Valentina at all, and there was never a moment where you were like, "Oh, she could start swaying momentum, even just a little bit." It was all just one-sided traffic. Valentina putting in that work, and Mario Yamasaki got fired for how one-sided it was. So that's why that's starting my list at number 3.
Was that a title fight?
No, it was.
Okay.
I want to say it was Valentina's first fight at the 125 weight class. I could be wrong.
Okay. Damn.
All right, I like those picks. To start off, my number 3 is one of these fights that really showed who this guy was going to be, and that is Ilia Topuria versus Josh Emmett. I remembered this fight being extremely dominant. I remember at least 4 knockdowns for Ilya. I watched it back this morning, and it was almost more dominant than I remember it being. Ilya got all the rounds. 2 of the rounds, I believe, were scored 10-8. Man, just a real showcase for Ilya in terms of his jab, his right hand. He wasn't even really throwing too much to the body, but something that we don't see from Ilya a lot, he was using calf kicks in this fight in the beginning to cut back on Josh Emmett's explosiveness. And it was clear that that was the game plan, to just use it early on to kind of take away that Emmett power, because he was kicking him in the calf in rounds 1 and 2. And then once Emmett was kind of showing that he couldn't move as well and couldn't really sit on his punches, Ilya just started going right back to just pure boxing and just absolutely dominating him. Ilya dropped him, I think, twice in round 1, and then again dropped him in round 4. The only round that was somewhat close on strikes was round 5, because Emmett knew he was down pretty badly and he needed to come up with something. So he started being really, really aggressive. And Ilya was just being very defensively sound, and then just decided to take Emmett down and dominate him there. Was landing good ground and pound, had really good, like had his back almost at some points. So just like complete domination from Ilya. And yeah, that's my number 3.
Nice.
I love that fight, honestly. It's a great one. Yeah.
It's cool to see a game plan come together like that too, where you can tell it was very strategic.
Beautiful.
The shoulder roll that he used.
He was so good defensively, and it wasn't even really like a full on like Philly shell. It was just like he was completely covered.
Yeah, it's like he knew Josh Emmett's only weapon was that big overhand right, and so the calf kicks made it so he couldn't put the weight on it for the overhand right, and then he was putting himself positionally with his footwork in a place where he could always just roll it off the shoulder, and then he started countering.
Yeah, just beautiful.
It's one of my favorite UFC fights ever.
Yeah, and that was like where we really see like one of my favorite combos that Ilya, I know I'm going kind of long on this one, but the Ilya has so much success with he jab, and then he takes a pause, feints, and then comes in with the right, with overhand right, left hook to the body, back to the overhand right. It's such a it's such a good combo. We see him hit it on everybody.
Yeah, dude,
and he dropped Emmett. Yeah, he dropped Emmett with it like 2 or 3 times in this fight.
And Damon Jackson.
And Jai Herbert. But yeah, that's my number 3.
Nice. Well, for my number 2, I'm going to keep it at featherweight here. Talking about a guy that looks probably about as good as he ever possibly could. It's, one of the reasons I think we consider him to be one of the greatest featherweights of all time, and that is Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. I mean, I went back and watched this. It ended in the 4th round, and it was one of those performances where Volkanovski could not miss. He could not miss. He was landing at a 65% significant strike percentage. He was hitting him with takedowns. He was hitting him with leg kicks. He was hitting him with whatever he really wanted for pretty much the entire fight, with very little concern for damage coming the other way. It was one of those fights where it was peak Alexander Volkanovski. I don't think I've ever seen him look better than that. And I think that's even after seeing him fight guys like Ortega and his battles with Holloway. That was probably the best performance I've seen Volkanovski put on. And to end in a 4th round TKO is a nice way to cap that off too, right? It doesn't go the full decision. And so for me, I think that's got to be my number 2 for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That was prime Volk. That was
absolutely
right in the middle of when Volk was the man.
Yes. Yeah. At that point, it looks like he probably could have beat Islam for sure.
Yeah.
My number 2 is going to be Joseph Benavidez versus Davison Figueiredo 1 and 2. The first one did go over a little bit over the halfway point of the 2nd round, but I'm going to throw that second one in there because it was immediately following their first fight, and you can just pair them together. It makes a nice little
double
2
feature.
fights of violence there. Yeah, nice little double feature for you. Davison Figueiredo versus Joseph Benavidez was so one-sided, and especially in the second fight, you could just tell that Figueiredo just didn't give a shit what Joseph Benavidez was going to do to him. He was like, I don't care. He's like, I've been in here with you once before. You really don't have nothing for me. And it was some of the most brutal action we've ever seen at flyweight. Especially that finish that had Joseph Benavidez waking up screaming in the second fight. That shit's crazy, bro. Yeah. And on top of that, too, that was like when Figueiredo was just landing power shots on these flyweights and putting them unconscious. He was dropping them multiple times, throwing them around, just muscling them around like he didn't weigh anything. It was just very apparent that Figueiredo was just on a way different level in skill set, in like how he was like the condition for the fights. He was just so much stronger than Benavidez. There was nothing he could have done to him. And it was really fucked up that they made Joseph Benavidez fight him again after that first ass whooping that he took. But there was like some weird controversy with the headbutt, and there wasn't a lot of contenders going on. So they're like, all right, man, just do a rematch. And I think maybe Figgy missed weight too. Did he miss weight or something like that? And so he wasn't eligible to win the title. I think that might have happened.
I do remember some kind of weird controversy. Yeah, okay.
That's why they fought the second time, because the first one was very dominant, and they had to fight immediately again, like 6 months later for their next fights, and very, very one-sided, very brutal, and that's why that's my number 2.
So similarly, my number 2 pick is one of those fights where you're watching it, and similar to the Joseph Benavidez Davison Figueiredo fight, where you can clearly tell one guy is just not worried about what's coming back at him from his opponent. And my number 2 is very similar to that. Peter Yan versus Uriah Faber. Now, round 1, if you rewatch it, round 1 may look like it's a little bit close, but really Uriah Faber is only able to throw what he's throwing at Peter Yan because Peter is clearly just taking that round to take reads and kind of show himself how he's going to absolutely brutalize Uriah Faber starting in round 2. So in round 1, Uriah was coming in with this step in knee. And it was getting kind of close, but really Peter Yan just keeps such a good high guard that nothing really lands. And you have these moments where you're like, oh man, Uriah just kind of got something. But it's very clear that Peter Yan is he has a very good high guard. He's being very defensively sound, and he's clearly taking reads. Round 2 opens up. Peter starts really, really hurting him and ends up dropping him with a straight left, I believe it was. Either a straight right or a straight left. I can't remember what stance he was in. And then, honestly, it almost gets finished in that round, but Uriah survives to round 3. And then in round 3, Peter just continues to hurt him. And then this was one of the most impressive head kick knockouts to me. And it wasn't like Uriah Faber went completely out cold, but the distance at which Peter landed this kick was absolutely crazy. They were in clinch, like they had they were pretty much collar tied on each other. And whereas some people exit the clinch and throw an elbow or exit the clinch and throw a left hook to get that angle, Peter Yan throws like a front kick. It's like a mix between a front kick and a round kick, but it's more of like a snapping front kick, and just puts Uriah Faber down, and that's it. That's, Uriah Faber, like, he was throwing some good stuff in round 1, but realistically it was one of those fights where it was just a matter of time before Peter Yan got him.
Yeah. Nice.
So for those reasons, that is my number 2.
So for my number 1, if we're talking about somebody that had no concern for what his opponent was throwing back at him to the point where he decided to have a conversation with the commentary booth, has got to be Calvin Kattar. Personally, one of the worst knockouts or worst beatdowns that I've ever seen. Unfortunately, never ended in a knockout, went the full 5. Got to have been one of the biggest strike differentials. I was looking at the numbers here. Holloway threw 746 shots, hitting 447.
That's insane.
And the thing is I was looking at Calvin Kattar's numbers, and he threw 134.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he didn't fight back. It just didn't do anything. And it was one of those circumstances where, I mean, shit, I think we've all talked about it in the sense that this was the first fight that I personally have seen Dana White like be very concerned for Calvin Kattar. Like, don't talk to anybody. The moment this is over, get him out of there, get him to the hospital. Like, we're going to make sure he's okay. And man, I think that's one of those cases where Holloway has that style of like the death by 1,000 cuts, right? He just doesn't necessarily, outside of the Gaethje thing, doesn't necessarily always pack a ton of knockout power, but just will sit there and hit you and hit you and hit you and hit you, and you can't do anything about it. The decisions ended up being 50-43, 50-43, and 50-42, which puts it at least 2 10-8 rounds, if not more. Got to be one of the worst one-sided beatdowns for me. That's my number one.
I agree. It had to be on one of our lists for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
You scared Dana White like that, and it deserves a number one spot. Like Dana White was like, "This is the kind of fight where somebody fucking dies."
Yeah.
He was so scared.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
My number one is probably one of my favorite like fights to watch of all time. It is so. It's the epitome of a one-sided beatdown. It's going to be Mike Davis versus Thomas Gifford. And whenever I think of just a brutal one-sided ass whooping, it's this fight, because Mike Davis hits him with the cleanest combinations, all arcing punches, like those Ilya Taporia style punches where he plants his feet and you can just tell he's like really just cracking. He's hitting Thomas Gifford square in the face with these types of punches, wobbling him. Like a minute and a half into the first fight, they're already talking about how big of a skill differential, and like they're starting to mention it's like maybe the corner should let this fighter fight another day. He's obviously mismatched. The second round, they bring in Trevor Whitman, and Trevor Whitman's like, "Hey man, if you want this guy to keep making you money, you need to protect him from fights like this." And then like in the third round, they're like literally right before the finish, they're like, "I don't even know what happened. Like somebody should have stopped this fight. They should have thrown the towel. The referee should have stopped it." And then he gets probably one of the weirdest looking KOs you'll see. It's like a big hook cross, and then Thomas Gifford just face plants head first onto the mat. And what's hilarious about this fight is like Thomas would like shoot on him, and Mike Davis would just every single time he would do anything, just like no sell it, completely muscle him off. He looks like kind of a little bit bigger than Mike Davis too, which makes it even more funny to watch. But every single thing Thomas Gifford did, like Mike Davis, like embarrassed him. Like,
yikes!
I couldn't rave about this fight enough, because it's like if like a professional fighter fought some dude that trains at like fucking Bally Fitness, like hitting the bags.
Oh.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
was that a Mark Montoya fighter?
It was a Mark Montoya fighter,
Okay.
and he's pretty notorious for letting his fighters go out there and die. And it was so bad. I think it was a short notice replacement, and normally the UFC really favors people that'll jump in on short notice, even if they get their ass whooped. They immediately cut Thomas Gifford after that. Like I was like, yo, he stepped in on short notice to save Mike Davis this fight, and they still cut him after. Like that's how bad it was. But yeah, if you want to see some, and it was like one of the first fights in the Apex too, so you could really hear how hard those shots are that Thomas. And he wasn't like turning his face or anything like that. He was just taking him square in the fucking dome, dude. It was crazy. Crazy to watch. And he was getting wobbled too, so like he was just on the verge of getting finished in multiple rounds, and he just survives. And then in the third round just gets flatline KO'd on the feet and face plants. Like it was crazy.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that this is kind of the fight that sparked the idea for this video. Martin came to us saying, "Yo, have you guys ever seen Mike Davis versus Thomas Gifford?"
Yeah, it's a great fight.
And to be frank, I wasn't familiar with the entire fight, but even if you weren't familiar with this fight, you probably have seen the clip of Thomas Gifford going face plant on the canvas.
Yes. I've seen the finish everywhere.
Yeah, so definitely go watch that one. It's pretty crazy. Okay, my number one biggest one-sided beatdown of all time, unfortunately, was another short notice fighter coming in to get absolutely demolished. He did end up getting TKO'd in the 4th round. He was still on his feet, but it is one of those fights where you do kind of wish that the corner would have thrown in the towel a little bit sooner. And some people may not think that just because this guy was still standing at the end of it. But my number 1 is Sean O'Malley versus Chris Moutinho. It's not as crazy as the Holloway Cater one in terms of strike differential, but in terms of significant head strikes, just significant head strikes alone, O'Malley outlanded him 177-39, which is absolutely crazy. Moutinho, I really don't know how he didn't go down this fight. I mean, we've seen what Sean O'Malley is able to do to people. And I think maybe to Moutinho's credit, he didn't go down because of his mindset. Sometimes that's what it takes. And if you just walk forward towards a guy and you just are literally thinking like, fuck this, I'm not fucking going down. Like sometimes that's enough. And, but man, Sean O'Malley was just landing every strike in the book. I mean, every single combination. It was almost like, by round 3 and round 4, Sean O'Malley was like trying to like think back into his head to combinations that he's practiced. It's like by round 3, he's like, damn, I've hit him with literally everything that I know how to throw. And it's like, one of those like O'Malley fights where he's dribbling on you in the middle of the fight and then fucking dribbling on jab, dribbling to shake right hand, like doing all these crazy things. It's just like pure showcase for O'Malley. It was just like, look what I can do,
Yeah.
And Chris Moutinho was throwing, but he couldn't hit Sean. Like I said, he threw a good amount of strikes, but was only able to land somewhere in the 30s. And it was, like I said, there are very few fights where I've seen where I'm like, maybe this corner should throw in the towel. And so for that reason, it's my number 1.
Can I add a little thing here? Because I saw it the other day. I will give some credit to Chris Moutinho. Since being cut from the UFC, he's gone back down to, he's 5-0. He's gone back down to some smaller leagues, and he's finished 3 out of his last 5. So not only is he doing well, but he's doing really well outside. So, maybe it was one of those a little too soon kind of moments. But hey, you know what? Hopefully we'll see him again.
Yeah, we'll see him again, dude. He's going to come back.
I hope so, man.
That would be tight. I think with one more good win, I think he could get the attention of the UFC.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good pick, man. Because Sean O'Malley, I think I remember him breaking both of his hands on Chris Moutinho's face.
Yeah.
I think I remember. That's
I think he did. Like, that was like he had to take some time off after that fight, but just because his hands were messed up. But those are our top 3 best one-sided beatdowns of all time. Hopefully you guys will go back and watch those. They're really, really fun. And it's, some of them are really, really bad, but they are really fun fights. And they're only one-sided beatdowns because the opponents were there and they were game and they were, there for a fight. So they were fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Catch you on the next one.
Peace.
Peace.